Good morning. It is 9:02 a.m. on Wednesday, November 12th, 2014, and this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Authority Board is now in session. Mr. Tejas, are there any public comments?
There are no public comments.
Prior to beginning today's agenda, I'd like to welcome our newest member to the board, John Carlsruher. Comes to us with a distinguished career, a veteran, long career in engineering, brings a lot of expertise, a wealth of expertise to the board. And Mr. Carlsruher, welcome. Look forward to your contributions. Item 3, adoption of minutes for the CRRMA board meeting of October 22nd, 2014. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Yes. Is there a motion to accept the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 4, update, discussion, and action on the following ongoing CRRMA procurements. Item A, general engineering consultant. B, the expedited selection process for professional engineering services. And C, financial advisor services. Mr. Tejas.
Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. So what we have before us today was requested at the last board meeting. It was an update to the 3 procurements, the 3 main procurements that we have out right now. So what I thought I would do is take the last PowerPoint with the presentation in terms of where we are on those particular projects and basically just update it. So you will recognize the format and some of the information here. If I could have, there we go. Thank you, IT. So we're going to talk about these 3 procurements that the chair read into the record: the GEC, the General Engineering Consultant, the expedited selection process, and the financial advisor services. So again, you'll recognize some of these slides. This is in general the procurement process that we're going to be using for the General Engineering Consultant.
Mr. Tejas?
Yes, sir.
Just hold up for 1 second. You know, it's somewhat difficult to have a new board member come up to the days and have to work all the technology, and all of us kind of go through that learning curve. So have you got it up? Well, you were much quicker than I am, and it's just so congratulations. It's always difficult, and I didn't see you had it. I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Tejas. Are you set, Mr. Carlsruhe? Okay.
Great. Okay, so for the GEC selection, we're looking at a written response to the RFQ that would be reviewed by a technical review committee consisting of an individual from TxDOT, an individual from the city, and 1 from the county. All 3 of those individuals will be professional engineers, and I've spoken with the 3 individuals, and they're ready to go. As you may recall, we discussed this the last time, and the intention is to go with the reviews solely based on, and the selection, I should say, solely based on the written submissions from the general engineering consultant teams. However, we have left in there some flexibility to allow for an oral presentation to the full board. And if we go that route, then that oral presentation would count for 25% of the total selection scoring. However, the intent really is to rely on the written responses. This is the scoring criteria that was approved by the RMA board some time ago. Experience of the firm goes for 25%. The approach to services goes for 35%, and the staffing accounts for 40%. And in fact, this item was approved by resolution of the board. So here's the timeline. This is the update. So you'll notice I left the original proposed schedule, which had us in late July, early August issuing the RFQ, and then having the proposals due in late August, early September, with the selection occurring in September, October. November, December, we would actually have an GEC agreement executed. That was the goal. Now, of course, as we discussed last month, that timeline has slipped a bit. So the actual schedule is as you see it before you. November 10th, earlier this week, the RFQ was actually issued. It was put on the street. December 8th are when the proposals are currently due. And we have a comment period, a question period built in as well. We've got January as the proposed selection of the GEC team by the board, and with February being the anticipated execution date. So as you can see, we've slipped a bit, but I think we're still doing pretty well. The GEC agreement itself expires in January. However, unless we're entering into a new work authorization between its expiration and the execution of a new agreement, we should be okay. As I mentioned before, all of the work authorizations that are executed between the Regional Mobility Authority and the GEC survive the expiration of the master agreement. So that was done intentionally. Any questions on the GEC timeline?
Mr. Tejas, as I understand it, we are sending out the RFQ purely qualifications based. After that, the GEC selected based purely on qualifications. The negotiation process begins to finalize the pricing component, or to put the pricing component in contract. If we can't get to an agreement in regards to the first GEC selected on pricing, we would move to number 2. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And we will go through that process unless and until we actually enter into an agreement. And that's all dictated by the Professional Services Procurement Act by Texas.
If that were to happen, would that put us in danger of extending past the February 2015 when the current GEC agreement that is in place expires?
It likely would.
And
Yes,
could
sir.
we extend that on a short-term basis?
Actually, yes. So the way that the original general engineering consultant agreement was written was that it had a 5-year base term with 2 1-year options. We've only exercised a single 1-year option, so we have the ability to extend it another year. Now, outside of that, we could do additional shorter periods as well. But so to more directly answer your question, yes, we have that ability to extend if we need it.
The Technical Review Committee is already selected, is that correct, and in
Yes,
place?
sir. Yes, sir.
And all engineers, I believe, is what you mentioned earlier, correct?
Yes, sir.
Any questions from the board in regards to the GEC selection process?
Very well. So let's go on to the expedited selection process for professional engineering services. As a reminder, this one is a little bit different because the intent of this one is really to develop a pre-qualified list of professional engineers that could provide services to us at any time once a project and funding is identified. So very generally, and again, you've seen most of these slides as well, but a pre-qualified list of firms has been updated and posted online, so we've already gone through that. We have that pre-qualified list. It's a 2-step. And so and I'll skip this because this really is the process that we've discussed before. Here is the scoring criteria that we've discussed, and in fact, this scoring criteria was approved by board resolution as well. We've got team organization, staffing, and DBE component comprising 30%, 25% for past project experience, 35% for project understanding and approach, and lastly, project scheduling is set at 10%. So, project timeline, you'll see the first 2 bullets, those have already occurred. We've received firm updates and applications for the pre-qualified list. I would mention, and there was a note in an earlier slide also, that our pre-qualified list is intended to be open year-round. So if you're not on there for some reason right now, we encourage the submissions of those pre-qualified questionnaires at any time, and we review them fairly quickly, and we'll get you on that list as quickly as we can. So that happened in July. We reposted that and asked everybody to update their information, many of which did. In July, then, that pre-qual list was updated, finalized, and posted to the website. So the original schedule for this second phase, and I should mention for the benefit of our new member and also the public, the intention really was to have an updated pre-qualified list online ready to go, and then from there we were going to issue an RFP to the pre-qualified list, and really that RFP, and the intention of that RFP was to begin selecting firms to do work for our 2013 County Comprehensive Mobility Plan projects. So that was really the intent of getting this all updated in June and July of 14. So in that regard, we have developed the RFP and sent that to TxDOT. We recently received approval from TxDOT on the RFP. You can see the original proposed schedule. We were anticipating the RFP's approval a little bit earlier than we actually got it. So that skewed all of those dates. Here's the actual schedule at the bottom. In January, we intend to issue the RFP to the pre-qualified list. And I'd mentioned we've pushed that quite a bit for a couple of reasons. One is we don't want to have the RFP out on the street and require the firms to do work over the holiday breaks. And then secondly, there's been a lot of interest and questions from the firms about applying or going after the GEC contract and going after this pre-qual list as well. So what we're doing in essence is pushing this procurement after the selection of the GEC, so that there's no longer a question in that regard. So in January, we intend to issue the RFP to the pre-qualified list, and the selection committee will recommend rankings in February, and by mid-2015, we'll begin awarding county comprehensive mobility plan projects to the individual firms. Now that mid-2015 is a little bit vague, and it's intentionally written that way, and that's because the funding for the CMP, the county CMP, a lot of it comes from the county directly. And as we've discussed at our last meeting and several of the prior meetings, the county is working on a proposal to provide the funding for those projects as a direct result of the Attorney General's opinion recently. So we don't have a final process. Excuse me. We don't have a final process by which the county is actually going to fund those projects. So I'm hopeful that by mid-2015 we have that approach finalized, and more importantly, we have access to those funds through the necessary agreements between the RMA and the county. So that's why we're shooting for mid-2015. Obviously, if the county moves quicker and we're able to execute those agreements quicker, then we will expedite all of these steps. So any questions on this selection process?
Just a quick comment. The Vice Chair, Mr. Wardy, and I reviewed this timeline with Mr. Tejas, and we felt to be in the best interest, despite the fact that we didn't necessarily want to move it. It was best overall from a logistics standpoint, from an ease purpose, to move this to a January 2015. So this came upon the direction of Mr. Wardy and I, and to make it easier and cleaner with the GEC process and then the expedited selection process. So thank you, Mr. Tejas.
Of course. So with that, that takes us to the financial advisor procurement. So on this one as well, we have a selection committee that will develop recommendations to bring forward to the board for selection. In this instance, we have an individual from the city of El Paso, and specifically SB Garcia, who serves as our budget analyst from the OMB division of the city. We also have someone from the city of El Paso's financial services department. Currently, Mark Sutter has volunteered. And lastly, we have an individual from the county's audit department. Currently, Wally Hargrove, who's I believe the deputy auditor for the county, will serve that role as well. So those three individuals will be reviewing those submittals. Final selection, though, as mentioned, will be made by the board, and that applies for all three procurements. These are the scoring criteria that were approved by the board: 30% for experience and qualifications, 30% for scope of services, 15% for cost of services, 15% for depth and scope of resources, and lastly, 10% based on references. And the procurement timeline is here. Originally, we intended to issue the RFP in July, with selection occurring in August or September. We've pushed that. The RFP has gone out. It went out on October 29th, and we anticipate the selection of a financial advisor in December of 2014. So that is the revised schedule.
Just to circle back real fast on the financial services, financial advisor, that's a 3-year contract with some 2-year options, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the GEC contract is a 5-year contract with some 1-year options,
correct?
That can be exercised by the RMA at our discretion.
That is correct, yes, sir.
Last thing, just for the board to be aware, the technical review committee is going to decide, and if the technical review committee comes to the scoring so close, they're going to request that the final scoring comes to the board itself for oral presentations, and the boards will have a 25% weight of the overall total score to make the final selection, should the technical review committee scoring be close, correct, Mr. Tejas?
That is correct. So with the general engineering consultant procurement only. Correct. So the intention there really is, if it's too close, or if there's some other reason that the technical review committee finds that there would be value in having the oral presentations, and then the recommendation will come forward to the board. That is correct. And so whatever,
be sometime in January?
I believe so.
That's fine, Mr.
Right,
Tejas.
so January, yes, sir.
So it's really not the board's discretion, it's the technical review committee's discretion based on how close the scoring is.
That's the way that it's currently structured, yes. But I believe that obviously we all serve at the at the discretion of the board. So if the board should be interested in having the oral presentations, we could do that. I would highly recommend against it, frankly and honestly, and for the reasons we've discussed at prior board meetings. But we can certainly have that conversation again, should you be interested.
I agree with you. I think we let the engineers make the selection, and only if the scoring is close, then it comes to the board. I like the process that is currently set up. I just wanted to clarify for the board and our new board members, should the oral presentations be required. Any questions on any of the processes for the 3 procurements? No. Thank you, Mr. Tejas.
Thank you.
We'll move right to item 5, and you may just stay right there, Mr. Tejas, if it might be easier for you. So, presentation, discussion, and action on a veteran toll waiver program. Mr. Tejas?
So I'll introduce this item, and thankfully we've got Ron Fagan here as part of our general engineering consultant team that will actually provide this PowerPoint presentation to you. But I did want to give a little bit of background on this. Ever since the Regional Mobility Authority opened the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes in January of 2014, we had been asked about a veteran toll waiver option and whether or not we were going to implement one. So what we had done, and we had been asked by members of the community, elected officials and others, so what we've done in response to that is really look at what other tolling agencies and other similarly situated agencies to the RMA, we looked at what they're doing throughout the state. So what you have before you as this in this PowerPoint is a breakdown of what other entities are doing, some history in there as well, and certain alternatives should the RMA board be interested in pursuing a toll waiver program for the Camino Real. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Fagan to come up and provide the PowerPoint to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tejas.
Mr. Chairman, authority members, good morning. Ron Fagan with Fagan Consulting. We serve on the GEC team. This morning, for your information, we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about the law that instituted or created the Veterans Discount Program or Toll Exemption Program. We'll look at what others are doing in the state. We'll discuss high level some alternatives that you all may consider in the future, and we'll just open it up for discussion or questions after that point. Okay, somebody please remind me how to advance the ball. Okay. All right, so this is what we essentially said. These are the objectives of this briefing. So in 2009, House Bill 3139 was passed, and it gave certain qualifications for groups of veterans to be allowed either free toll or discounted programs. By the way, everyone that has instituted this program, it's 100% free. Nobody has a discount program. So for qualifying disabled veterans, Purple Heart awardees, Medal of Honor, and Legion of Valor are currently the list of qualified veterans that tolling entities can consider giving toll exemption or discounts to. In the state of Texas, what has occurred to this point, excuse me, Harris County Toll Road Authority was the first to institute it using pictures of license plates, followed by essentially Net RMA and Tyler using the same process. Take a picture, let the pay-by-mail process work, and go back and exempt the toll or dismiss the toll from that point. Cameron County RMA is just in the process of beginning this. They want to go back retroactively to September and implement this. They are not quite there yet. TxDOT has the ability to do this based on their customers having a toll tag or via license plate. The interesting point about TxDOT's program at this point, it is funded through the sale of surplus equipment, and that is a finite amount of money that is running out. So TxDOT has the plan to go back to the legislation to find additional funding to continue this program. The two agencies that currently do not offer exemption to qualifying veterans are North Texas Tollway Authority in Dallas and the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority in Austin. Both cite that they support the program but are looking for financial support funding from the legislation before they actually enact the program. Forgive me, my Barry White voice snuck up on me a couple of days ago. So there are some alternatives we've reviewed and we would like to present for information purposes that you might look at. Two of the options involve AVI, or being able to use transponders in the vehicle to be able to make the arrangements for these discounts or exemptions. The third would be the already existing pay-by-mail process. The first option would be with the AVI with Camino Real purchasing toll tags to give to the veterans and Camino Real also funding these accounts. The upside is that in El Paso, the veteran has exemption from paying the toll. The potential negative for the RMA is these transactions would have to go out to the interoperable hub. You would pay 8% of the amount of the toll for each of these. And another risk is the customer uses another toll road in Texas. You would be in a position to have to pay for that as well. Worst case scenario, and that is one of these people moves to Houston or Dallas, continues to use his toll tag, and you are funding this for somebody that does not even live in the El Paso area. We looked at the cost. These are all estimates. There are a few things you should understand about this. This deals with only Cesar Chavez, looks at the next 3 years based on projected traffic. This assumes a complete 100% waiver of the toll. There's no discount in this process. And research indicates that the disabled veteran population or plates, qualifying plates, is about 1.8% of those in El Paso County. So if you walk through this process, you can look at the average toll rate, AVI being those that have transponders, pay by mail are those that pay based on a license image being taken of the license plate. You have total transactions, 1.8% of that gives you the number under the Disabled Veteran Program, and you look at the potential revenue loss by year. There are additional costs with all of these programs, and you can see those as well, purchasing the toll tag for all of those years. Additionally, the cost to implement the program estimated to be about $12,000, and then ongoing over the next 3 years, about $10,800. That is option one with an AVI tag. Second option would be that you purchase the AVI tags, but put the effort and money into adding the filters to your local project host server so that these transactions stay local. They do not go out to the IOP hub. You don't have to pay 8%. And it is a funded account that the veteran would be responsible for their tolls on any other toll facility in the state of Texas. That won't go through the entire thing. Same assumptions, and this is what these costs look like. You will notice at the bottom, however, the $12,000 changed to $32,000 to implement, and that is adding the $20,000 software development that your system integrator likely would have to do to your system to be able to filter these transactions locally and not let them go out to the interoperable hub. Finally, what is in place today, and in this scenario would be the fastest to implement, is the pay-by-mail alternative. Essentially, the veteran used the toll road, the image is taken of the license plate, they are sent a bill, the veteran then has to turn around and call MSB. MSB confirms with CRRMA that you in fact want to waive this rather convoluted process. Then ultimately, if approved, that license plate is put on a list that says, we do not send another bill to this license plate, but the image has to be reviewed, and currently you are paying 9.5 cents per image per transaction for image review as well. If a veteran has an existing account with a transponder in the windshield, the only way to take part in this process would be to remove the transponder from the vehicle. Otherwise, the transponder will always be the default mechanism to pay the toll. This is what those costs look like with that process. Very labor-intensive process. And there's a summary of what all costs look like through the three alternatives. AVI 1, which is purchasing transponder, sponsoring the accounts, sending them out to the IOP hub, and potentially having the responsibility to pay for tolls elsewhere. AVI Alternative 2 is being able to filter those transactions here. You would still provide the transponders to the veterans. Pay by mail is the process that is in place now, used by several other entities. Advantages and disadvantages for each. I don't have to read all of these for you. Obviously, the green, positives, red, negatives. What we will say about Alternative 2 is that it does give you greater future flexibility if you want to do things like provide transponders to law enforcement who currently create an image transaction on your roadway, but it ends up being a non-revenue item, no income to you, but it is costing you 9.5 cents for each one of those transactions. Your questions?
Thank you, Mr. Fagan. Looking at the list of plates that would be eligible for the the zero toll, it would be disabled veterans, Purple Heart recipients, Medal of Honor recipients, and Legion of Valor recipients. Is that correct?
Correct. That's the current state.
A very distinguished group. The two entities that don't provide the discount are waiting on some sort of funding mechanism for that to be put in place prior to doing that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is NTTA the largest toll operator in the state in terms of the amount of roadway, or do you know how they compare to kind of the rest?
I don't know if they're the largest. It'd be close between them and Hectra as far as revenue on an annual basis.
Got it.
Revenue for Hectra closes in around $800 million a year. I don't think NTTA is quite that high.
The other item, looking at these numbers, they don't anticipate Border Highway West coming online. Is that correct?
No, sir.
So from the presentation itself, the most cost-effective, looking at Border Highway West coming on in 2.5, 3 years, would be item 2. Is that correct?
Long term, that is the best option, yes.
So looking at implementing this program and going with the best solution, about how long do you think it would take us to do the custom programming and get that in place to be able to offer this benefit to the veterans?
Right. To answer your question directly, I would give the integrator probably 3 months would not be an issue. You have to define what the requirements are, what you want to happen. They have to do the work. We need to test it, and then we need to implement it. So conservatively, 3 months should be fine. This should not be a huge change for what you already have. You already have a project host server. This is just a functionality that is not there now.
And I think it's important also to put on that last note, Mr. Tejas, how many plates do we have currently that are exempt from using our facilities? Around 2,000?
I apologize. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it is a couple thousand. Yes, sir.
So basically what happens in that particular case, we have the fire, we have PD, we have ambulance, all that can use that particular facility at no cost, but we're being charged because we're sending those transactions to the iHub. If we contain these with the software update ourselves,
right,
in addition to not being charged these administrative fees on the exempt plates for the veterans, so we would also not be charged a fee on that as well. Is that correct, Mr.
Correct.
Reagan?
You would not have to process the images and pay for that process to determine that there's no revenue involved here.
I'll open it up to some of the board members for any questions that they may have.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. You know, we're working on the groundbreaking today for the border highway extension. So, you know, we don't have huge usage on the toll road. It was built for future capacity, but
right,
with I think that, you know, we're not going to take a position today. I know that this was a briefing for the board. I would hope that the board would support this because I think it's important for our community. But I think that looking in the big picture for the future for the border highway extension, the western part, and this toll road, that we build a system that is effective and efficient and is going to serve both entities, the disabled veterans and the other distinguished members, and help us operate it efficiently.
On the efficiency note, we like to note that alternative to AVI is the least effort involved for the veteran as well. Once that process is set up, there's nothing else they need to do. They don't need to call if they get a bill. They don't need to take a tag out or put a tag in. It is just the process is in place. Once it's set up, there's nothing else they need to do.
So basically, as I understand that process, we would issue a tag to the veteran itself that would be exempt. We'd be capturing those tags at our own servers here, and
right,
and we'd have some special software that show that that tag would be exempt and there'd be no charges for the veteran itself. Is that correct?
Correct. And the veteran could still use that account in other parts of Texas on toll facilities, but CRRMA would not be responsible for paying those tolls.
So if the veteran wanted the flexibility of that, they could then fund that. They wouldn't be required to fund the account
right,
that we give them, but should they want the flexibility to use it at other toll facilities, they could fund it, use it here, no charge, and use it other locations for convenience.
Yes.
You know, I'd like to go on the record and state that, you know, this looks like a great option and something that the board should support. What I'd like to do and what I'd like to propose to the board is that we ask our GEC to come back with kind of some hard and fast timelines and you know, cost to say this is what it will take. This is the best solution. It seems to be the most convenient for the veterans. It seems to be the best long-term financially for ease and being able to manage this program and without a whole lot of risk for the RMA. So what I'd like to ask is for the GEC to come back and give us a timeline, let us know exactly how long it would be put in place, and at that time the board can decide whether we want to put this benefit for the disabled veterans, Purple Heart recipients, Medal of Honor recipients, and Legion of Valor in place at on our toll facilities.
Okay, yes, sir.
Chair, do we need a motion to take that action?
Yes, please.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Fagan.
Thanks, sir.
Item 6, discuss and approve a board resolution authorizing the adopting of policies and procedures in connection with continuing disclosure obligations for the CRRMA. Mr. Tejas?
For this item, I've asked Paul Braden, our bond counsel, to join us and break out these policies in very general terms, and Mr. Braden will go through in more detail, but in general terms, these are policies that are being recommended by the bond counsel, and I agree, certainly. They're being recommended to help guide the regional mobility authorities' continuing disclosure obligations. Really what that, when you boil it down, it really speaks to when we issue debt, we have certain disclosure requirements on an annual basis and ongoing basis, really, for material events. So this policy document that we're recommending approval for today really breaks out how the management of those disclosure obligations would occur. So with that, I'd ask Mr. Braden to provide some details.
Thank you, Raymond. Paul Braden with Norton Rose Fulbright, Bond Counsel of the RMA. Let me just give you a little big picture background with respect to this. So unlike publicly traded companies, the SEC cannot regulate directly government issuers such as yourself. So the way the SEC has found to implement certain disclosure regulations is they regulate the underwriters. So the underwriters are still subject to SEC regulations. So the fact the SEC cannot regulate an issuer such as yourself directly, what they end up doing is they regulate the underwriters, and they say you underwriter cannot sell bonds on behalf of a government entity unless you follow certain rules and you enter into an agreement with the issuer to follow certain rules. And the main rule with respect to that is SEC Rule 15C212, and that requires that the official statement, which is the document by which you sell bonds, contains certain disclosures in it. It also requires that the issuer enter into a contract with the underwriter that specifies certain continuing disclosure obligations. And that means for every year you have to provide certain annual financial information that is provided to a system called CRRMA, which is part of the MSRB, and it's a publicly open system where it's put out into the market. You also have to file disclosure events with respect to certain specified events. So the RMA has 2 outstanding bond issues, and it has entered into contracts pursuant to those 2 issues that say we will file this annual financial information within certain deadlines and then file any notice of one of these material events. If the RMA issues bonds in the future, they would enter into comparable contracts. What this policy does is sort of put a formality to the procedures by which you adhere to your continuing disclosure obligations, adhere to those contractual obligations that are out there. And it basically appoints a responsible officer, which in this case would be the executive director, to be familiar with the EMA system, to be familiar with your contractual undertakings with respect to annual financial information and the material events. It also appoints a board representative to also be in the loop and be familiar with those things. The board representative is the finance chair unless the board designates otherwise. And then it just goes into some detail about what those requirements are and when they're required to be filing. It also specifies that when you're about to do a bond deal and you're about to sell securities, who's in the loop with respect to that and what is the process in terms of confirming your compliance with your continuing disclosure obligations before you issue bonds or make a public statement. It specifies certain record retention in terms of 6 years. It has annual training to take place every year with respect to these obligations. It doesn't specify the length of training, and it can be given by myself as bond counsel or your financial advisor or incorporated into some other annual training. So but it's just, again, to put it on the radar and make sure people are in the loop and understand these obligations and keep an eye out for it. And then somewhat helpful, besides attached to the back of it, is an exhibit with defined terms, but Exhibit B has the list of the events. Currently, it's 14 events by which you have to give notice, and so that's a helpful reference. This is what the current rules, FCC 15C212 states. That rule can be amended and changed over time, but it'll be a good point of reference to keep in mind, because I think generally everybody has a feel for you have to file your financial information within 6 months at the end of your fiscal year, but it's a little hard to put your finger on what these material events are because they're just specified by statute. So in your policy, you do have sort of a quick list where people can refer to it. And the policy itself is only 5 pages, so it's not extremely long. I tried to write it not too complex, something that could be understood by anyone who cares to read it. And I think that's a summary, and I have it open for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Braden?
Mr. Braden, is this a document that we need to annually review and take the recommendations to update, or only when there are changes proposed by the SEC?
When there are changes in 15C212, then yes, I think you need to review it. I think as part of the annual training session, we'll take out the policy and take a look at it. But for the most part, it should be able to stand on its own for a while unless they start tinkering with 15C212. Unless in working with it there seem to be any issues, like if somebody doesn't really make sense to be in the loop in terms of disclosure, those type of things, we can then tinker with it. But it should be able to sit around for a while.
And you as our counsel, continuing counsel, will notify us when those changes occur and we need to update the document?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? If not, is there a motion to authorize the adopting of policies and procedures in connection with the continuing disclosure obligations for the CRRMA?
Move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Item 7, item 6 is approved. Item 7, discuss and take appropriate action in connection with the municipality's continuing disclosure cooperation initiative. At this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to retire into executive session subject to Section 5510.071 consultation with attorney. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We are moving to executive session at 9:40 a.m. on Wednesday, November 12th, 2014. 9:57 a.m., 9:58 a.m. on Wednesday, November 12, 2014. Do we have a motion to retire from executive session and return to general session? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is back in session. Item 7, discuss and take appropriate action in connection with the municipality's continuing disclosure cooperation initiative. Mr. Tejas?
I would ask Mr. Braden to brief the board on this item.
Good morning. Paul Braden, Fulbright Bond Counsel to the RMA. The SEC recently introduced a voluntary compliance program called the Municipalities Continuing Disclosure Cooperation Initiative, usually referred to as MCDC. The program allows municipal issuers such as the RMA to self-report to the SEC possible violations involving material inaccurate statements made in bond offering documents, specifically those with prior compliance with continuing disclosure agreements. So the policies you just adopted were with respect to continuing disclosure agreements. This MCDC initiative is also about this sort of the same stuff. The program does not require issuers to admit or deny any fault, but the SEC would require, if it found any noncompliance to be material, that the issuer agree to a cease and desist proceeding under Section 8A of the Securities Act for violations of 17A of the Securities Act if noncompliance is material. Now, the RMA staff, Raymond and my firm, did an extensive review of the RMA's prior offering documents with respect to its obligations, and we discovered that there was a minor issue of noncompliance. The RMA failed to state in its most recent OS, the 2014 OS that you just did, that it had not timely filed a notice of material event with respect to 3 upgrades on your 2008 bonds. So there were 3 upgrades that took place with respect to 2008 bonds. One upgrade was by Moody's, and it was a recalibration in the industry. So what Moody's took was all the bond ratings out there. They decided for municipal issuers to go ahead and move them up a notch, and they did that across the board. So it did not change or was not based on a reflection of the credit of the bonds, but it was really just they're changing their standard across the board, and that was widely known in the press. And so there's a strong argument that that type of thing wouldn't be material.
And that change was an improvement in the overall bond
Right.
rating, correct?
These changes are improvements. These are all upgrades to your prior bond deals. The other 2 changes had to do with the road itself. At one point, when the road was completed, because the 2008 bonds financed the construction of Spur 601. So at one point when the road was completed, the elimination of the construction risk associated with that completion date pushed the bonds up a little bit of a notch. And S&P upgraded the bonds accordingly. And then S&P views the 2008 bonds basically as a pass-through credit of TxDOT because the pass-through toll agreement pays for those bonds. So when they upgraded the state of Texas generally, they upgraded these bonds as well. Those 2 S&P upgrades were reported to the CRRMA, which is the public system by which all this information is filed. They were reported directly by S&P because S&P now has a direct feed, but the RMA did not file their piece of paper to indicate these upgrades. The RMA did not make these filings because it was not getting notice from the rating agencies. The notices were only going to TxDOT because the S&P viewed TxDOT as the ultimate credit in these type of things. And Raymond has contacted the rating agencies to send notice directly to the RMA now on a going forward basis. So those are the 3 things that we discovered when we did our analysis and review of your outstanding bond issues. And we do not believe that those are material, but it is, again, we brought it to the board attention to whether or not it wants to make a self-reporting filing under MCDC.
Any questions for Mr. Braden? With that, Mr. Braden, I also, I'd like to ask for a motion. And although I don't believe it's material, in an overabundance of caution and transparency, I move that the Executive Director of the CRRMA be authorized and directed to file with the SEC a completed MCDC questionnaire on behalf of the CRRMA disclosing the omitted statements in the 2014 OS.
Second.
Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Item 7 is approved. Thank you, Mr. Braden.
And just to be clear, that's just filling in a questionnaire to say that you'd be willing to accept the MCDC initiative. It's not an official settlement. It's nothing like that. And the SEC has to come back and talk to the issue, and they may very well agree with our conclusions that it's not material.
I appreciate that update, and we're never sure what somebody considers material, so as I mentioned, with an overabundance of caution, we'll go out and move that forward. Item 8, update and discussion on the Executive Director's Report. A, the Airway Aesthetic Project. B, the Border Highway West Project groundbreaking. And C, the El Paso Streetcar Project industry review meetings. Mr. Tejas?
Yes, these final three items are simply updates, so we won't have any action requested on any of them. And they're all good updates as well. The Airway Aesthetic Project, Airway and I-10, this project is nearing completion. In fact, we anticipate substantial completion on November 21st. We've got a meeting scheduled for this Thursday to kind of go through some of the final punch list items. We'll have a walkthrough, I believe, scheduled for the 18th. So we're getting very close on this particular project. And actually, we've been asked by Representative Acosta about a ribbon cutting. So we're looking at that. In fact, we're on this Thursday, during this Thursday construction meeting, we will be discussing potential options for that. So that one's moving forward, almost complete. Item B, Border Highway West project groundbreaking. The project is actually, they've got a groundbreaking event scheduled for 11 a.m. this morning. So I wanted to remind you all of that if you can make it, and I'll be there as well. And then lastly, the El Paso Streetcar Project. I wanted to mention that we've been these last 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, and also this afternoon, I've been involved in industry review meetings with entities that are interested in pursuing the procurement for the streetcar project. We've gotten a great deal of interest, a lot of responses. We've had, I believe, 4 meetings to date. That sounds low, but I think it is 4 meetings to date. We've got 2 scheduled for this afternoon, and we've had a number of other written submittals outside of the meeting requests as well. So we get a lot of interest, a lot of folks coming in from out of town, car builders, manufacturers, rail specialists, and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to let you know that we're moving forward on this one, and more importantly, we've got a lot of interest. So subject to your questions, that's all I have for you.
Mr. Tejas, with the interest on El Paso Streetcar, can we just provide some sort of updates on our webpage with kind of the current project timelines and, perhaps as the project moves to letting and construction, look at providing updates, photos, completion times to make it easier for the public to access? As you mentioned, this is a high visibility project, not just locally, but I think really on a national scale. There's a lot of people looking at this particular project, and I think it'd be nice to have one central location that can somewhat disseminate that location if we could.
Certainly. And in fact, the board asked I think at our last board meeting about 3 weeks back to add a button from the homepage. So I've contacted IT and we're working on that, and we'll do that. The dates and all of that sort of information that you are asking for, they're in the documents, but you'd have to be a technical expert to actually go in there and find it. So we'll put it in a little more easy to access format. But absolutely, we can do that.
Right, if we just had a special link, as you just mentioned, that shows the downtown route. A lot of folks are still not exactly familiar with the route. Proposed renderings, whatever we can put out there just
Absolutely.
To answer some of the questions.
Sure, we'll do that.
Any other questions from the board for any of the items that we discussed in 8? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
There's a second. We have a motion and a second. We are adjourned at 10:06 a.m. on Wednesday, November 12th, 2014. Thank you for your continued service to the board.